The building is nice, but if we didn't have the building, we'd find another way to worship God.
What's going to become eventually of these buildings?
We've earned the cynicism and distrust.
And no matter how painful it is, we need to have the conversations.
Because there's a special place in hell waiting for what those men did.
With over 150 churches across roughly 40 square miles, Erie, Pennsylvania and its surrounding municipalities have no shortage of religious spaces.
One of the advantages that Erie has had from the beginning is that it was built on a gridded footprint, a la Thomas Jefferson. So even folks who are not particularly familiar with the city find its footprint relatively legible. It's easy to get around this town. It's kind of coherent because of its gridded pattern. And it made sense for religious bodies to build their places of worship on the corners that define that grid. Religious people felt that it was essential to have an architectural presence within the grid, within the fabric of the city, defining a particular geographical place. Place is a very important concept to religious people. Religion has to play out in a particular space and time. Again, that protects it from becoming hopelessly ethereal and vanishing in the thin air. Sacred places frame the religious experience for the people who inhabit them.
We're currently in the First Presbyterian Church of the Covenant. That's a long name for a church, but it's the result of a merger of other churches.
So, this church was built by the faithful gifts of its members. People who thought the community, our neighborhood, the Presbyterians in this town, however they thought about it, needed a beautiful space to worship in. But also in a sense where you can build relationships with people around you. Church is not just about, worshiping God. As important as that is, we would never, say that's not important. But it's also the building up of what we call the body, the members, the visitors, that we're bound together, we're bound to each other in faith. And the building of this sanctuary is an example of that people came together with a plan to do something dramatic.
The original Presbyterian Church in Erie was founded about 1815, and it was called First Presbyterian Church, and it sat at 5th and Peach Street. That church was there, and over the years, other people within the congregation wanted a different type of worship. Presbyterians are known to look for another way to do things. So they actually spun off another church, which is actually across the street from where the First Presbyterian Church was. And that was the Park Presbyterian, right on Perry Square on the south side of the street next to the City Hall. So a group of members went to that church and started growing. Also, First Presbyterian Church, another group from that church, started a church at 10th and Sassafras. It was called Central Presbyterian Church, and it was, again, a group of people from the original First Presbyterian wanted to break away and do their own style. Different types of education and worship was part of what they did. And those two churches went along, grew and grew, to a point where they couldn't, each one was overloaded. So they merged together starting in 1928, and they merged to form Church of the Covenant. And that's the building this is the building they built at that time. And it opened in 1930. It was, it took about 2 years to build.
There were 2 Tiffany windows in that church. And so when Park came here to be part of Covenant Church, those windows were transferred over. So there was the River of Life window. The Good Shepherd window is still there. The River of Life window was sold. It was It was sad. I mean, it was sad and good at the same time. It was up in a corner of the church where no one was ever going to see it. And the congregation, the leadership wrestled. And so what should we do with it? No one looks at it. It can be, we can use this money for ministry resources. Sotheby's has an annual Tiffany auction. It was part of the auction. Some people are not happy about it, and some people still aren't happy about it. It's a church. No one's ever completely happy with everything.
And so, somewhere in the world, a window from the Park Presbyterian Church sits far from home.
Someone spent a lot of money on it, and so my hunch is it's probably in the Middle East or Asia somewhere, if I had to guess.
While they may be down a window, the rest of the building remains largely the same.
It was just a magnificent building built for thousands of members, and they had that at one time. People that lived out here on the West 6th Street and around, neighborhood folks, had a lot of money in many cases, and they were generous with their money, and that helped build it. I think the cost to build it was around $1.2 million, which is a lot of money in 1929 and 30. You got to remember, that's Depression time.
This equates to a cost of roughly $24 million in 2023.
They did a fundraising project with all the members. This was a pretty exclusive membership. It was people who lived on the West 6th Street, sometimes called Millionaires Row, and we had a lot of members from that group, people that lived out here on the West 6th Street and around, neighborhood folks.
The church had succeeded in raising a small fortune, but one that still required an element of frugalness.
Well, it would have been far too expensive during the Depression to have constructed this building out of stone. So what we have is cultured stone. These are really very carefully shaven pieces of cement or concrete, mortared together very carefully to create the illusion of stone. Within those walls is actually steel. There's a steel skeleton doing the work of carrying the fabric of the building, but it's trying to look very hard like a medieval Gothic Catholic cathedral, frankly, even though it's a Presbyterian church.
The sanctuary is incredible. The second floor was originally classrooms that merged, became a preschool back in 1949. It was the first preschool in Erie. The basement was used for worship originally. That's a large open room downstairs with a full kitchen. We could do huge meals. We did meals with hundreds and hundreds of members back in the early days. And there's a huge choir room. It's a room that they use to rehearse. The third floor was all classrooms. There was a lot of Sunday school classes in those days. Yeah, when you think about when it was built, it's just amazing to me that they were able to pull it off.
When you look at the old drawings and you see the old sort of colored pencil and watercolor renderings of what they were going after, and then you see it actually in the physical design, it's amazing.
And while the Presbyterian Church of the Covenant continued to grow, the First Presbyterian Church experienced struggles. On April 14th, 1944, one of the earliest church structures built in Erie caught fire. The fire completely devastated the building. Erie's first congregation vowed to rebuild and stay strong, but with every passing decade, their numbers dwindled.
And then around 1980, I believe it was, the old First Presbyterian was at a point where their membership was lower and lower. So they came to an agreement to merge the First Presbyterian Church with Church of the Covenant. Hence the name First Presbyterian Church of the Covenant. I sometimes wish they would have come up with a new name because that's a lot to say.
One church divided into three, only to consolidate back into one church all within 150 years. And while beautiful, these buildings are functional, and their function is a question Erie's religious leaders all have to contend with, like this former Jewish temple.
It was a 30,000 square foot building, and this is a 10,000 square foot building. And over the years, it really no longer suited the needs of the congregation. And so when they went to evaluate what their needs were, they really decided that they were best to be served by building a new space, a space that was all on one level, that they didn't need to have elevators, and they didn't have to worry about mobility issues. So our building is completely wheelchair accessible, for instance. Even our Bema podium, our podium in our sanctuary, is accessible to anybody in a wheelchair if they need to have that. The Ark is completely accessible, all of those kinds of things. But the space was built to make sure everybody could access every part of it easily. You know, Judaism's relationship to buildings is always interesting. So unlike other faiths, we don't consecrate anything. Nothing is changed physically. So the question becomes, well, why do you need a building? Well, you don't. So God doesn't need you to build a building, you need a building, right? People need a space where they can be inspired, where they can be in a different mindset, right? So when you walk into the sanctuary, you know what you're there for, and you're just more open to the experience.
And for many, that mindset, that experience, is brought about by the music.
They say about music that no one leaves the church whistling the sermon, and that music is so primary to our worship experience.
Music is vital, especially within the Black church, the expression of our thanksgiving to God, rhythmic mobility, the clapping of hands, the physical expression of praise and worship. I mean, that's vital. It's just vital to the life of a church.
Yeah, music is important. It's always been important to this congregation. You can tell by the amount of money and time that's invested in an instrument like the organ that we have here.
The invention of the organ is accredited to the Greek engineer Ctesibius of Alexandria in the 3rd century BC. Permanent organ installations began to emerge in Europe during the mid-1300s. Records show large cathedrals like Notre Dame employing organists as early as 1332.
We have one of the largest organs in the tri-state area. It's large. There's at least 4 console keyboards. There's a room full of organ pipes, from little ones this big to ones that are 10, 12 feet tall.
Often characterized as the king of instruments, the church organ has played a central role in religious worship, but that's becoming increasingly challenging.
The beauty of this organ is it's part of the identity and the cultural life of this congregation and the way that we worship in a liturgical way that's similar to the liturgy of the Catholic Church. Now, the organ is a wonderful instrument, and it has been dealt with by many different professionals and companies over the years. But there's a difficult thing with organs and organists. There are fewer people who are skilled at playing pipe organs in our city, and there are even fewer organizations who can come in and provide maintenance for an organ like this. If it goes down, it doesn't work on Sunday morning, then there's an electric keyboard. It's a much smaller experience. The beauty of this organ is that it does fill the place, and that is part of, that's not something in the Bible that we need to, that Christianity has to have a pipe organ, but it's part of the identity and the cultural life.
And, you know, over the decades, there's certainly been a lot of controversy around music in the life of churches. Contemporary or traditional, and we use this terminology.
People connect differently to God. Some people need different things. For some people, that beautiful organ is nothing but fingernails on a chalkboard. For some people, drums are an abomination to the Lord.
Because everybody responds differently to different kinds of music. And to say that this is the only way to do it just doesn't work. It's not true, actually.
The instrument that remains central to nearly all worship, though, one that predates the popular organ, is of course the human voice.
We have a choir, and they come in and they sing, and they engage everybody into singing. It is a part of our expression to God.
There's something special about singing, right? When we celebrate birthday parties or anniversaries, there's music, there's singing. And why? Because it's celebratory. And so in worship, we celebrate.
And the voices of Erie's faithful once resonated far beyond the Erie city limits.
We sent a choir to Europe back in the 60s that toured Europe, and it was a big deal. And that's just not happening anymore. In the early days, there was at least 6 or 7 different choirs, bell choirs, adults, children, younger children, and it was just music was a big part of this church. And over time, the choir has shrunk to a point where we don't have the numbers anymore.
I sing in the choir, and in my teenage years, we had a junior choir up here that might have been about a dozen of us, and the adult choir might be a dozen people or so, but it got smaller and smaller as some of our members passed away.
So small that Carolyn now often stands alone in the choir stall.
Maybe the strongest draw, the biggest tie that pulls me here is that I'm continuing in my musical activity here in the church. We do have 4 people who play in a bell choir, and because we no longer have 8 or 10 people in bell choir, our choir director has found music that can be done by 8 bells. So 4 people, a bell in each hand, we can make music. So that's the larger choir that we have now.
I'm really saddened by one piece of our school, public education is the fact we have a STEM program and not a STEAM program, where you have, you're taking the arts out of that. And you want to learn math, learn music. It really is central. You want to learn you want to learn theory, learn music. And I think that's something that's missing, and we're seeing that in the church too, where there are fewer and fewer musically literate people in our culture today.
This was less of an issue when church and education were more closely aligned, and religion has consistently been at the forefront of education in its community.
C.S. Lewis made it clear that we would never have escaped the Dark Ages had it not been for religion. Keep in mind that it was the Roman Catholic Church who invented the modern idea of the university. The reason why academics even today, when they have academic exercises and so forth, commencement exercises, dress in robes, is that they're imitating the monks of the Middle Ages. They were churchmen. They were the deans, for example. A word that we still use in academia and church activity.
The monks aren't the only ones to have played a pivotal role. Avowed sisters have been central to much of the educational efforts within Christian worship, and this was equally true for the city of Erie starting in the mid-1800s.
Most of the sisters at that time staffed all of our Catholic schools. They also had Villa Maria College, which the Sisters of St. Joseph started. Mercyhurst University was started by the Sisters of Mercy. So the religious women in this diocese were very important for the educational piece.
A prominent figure among Erie's educationally focused religious leaders is Bishop Gannon, the namesake of Gannon University.
John Mark Gannon was an incredible builder. He built hospitals, he built convents, he built schools. He built universities and colleges, and this is perhaps one thing that maybe my generation and younger ones misunderstand, that there are great things that can be done with capital. There are great things that can be done when people sacrifice their own wealth to a larger cause, a greater cause. And John Mark Gannon understood that. He was able to inspire people to contribute to a vision that came to be embodied in hospitals, schools, churches, and so forth.
And the education of Erie's children was catered to by church after church after church.
St. Peter Cathedral had a parish school, which is across the street from the church on the catty corner.
Well, of course, this is a place of worship, but there have been areas of the church that have been used for Sunday schools.
The motivation to educate is often rooted in a desire to empower the community.
And we started this school because we saw the decline of education of many of our people, many of our children.
In some instances, Erie's churches have simply stepped in to offer support to schools that need it.
We have a huge gym next door. It's a beautiful gym. It was built in 1956 because Washington Elementary, which is right across the street, which is now Erie School District headquarters, didn't have a gym. And so the pastor at the time goes, you know what? Let's provide a place. And so we built this for the sole reason of being a community activity center and a place for the kids across the street who are going to that school to come for PE.
But while so many within the religious communities worked hard to educate and provide care for their neighbors, there were some that acted in bad faith. Starting in the 1980s, the Catholic Church increasingly became a focal point for the discussion surrounding religion and sexual abuse. The city of Erie was not excluded from that conversation. We asked Erie's religious leaders for their thoughts on the sexual abuse scandals, its impact on communities, and the future of their congregations. This is what they said.
I think when we look at the younger people and the sexual abuse scandal that occurred in the church and the grand jury report that came out, those were probably the most horrendous period in the church in this country.
They knew it, and they knew it for years. They did nothing to stop this abuse.
The church has hurt a lot of people over the years, whether it's Catholic, Protestant, it really doesn't matter. And we know that the church, for some folks, has a horrible reputation. And for some, it'll be a reputation that will never be repaired. And that saddens me to say that, because I know it's true. And we let a lot of people get hurt. Now, how are we going to respond to this?
If people get upset at the church, that's the first thing they'll throw at you. Well, you know, you have this rule, but yet these priests could do these terrible things.
We've earned the cynicism and distrust of many over the years. It's not always been a safe place for people, and there it is.
And so what looks like beautiful building from the outside, a place of beauty, for some people is a place of terror, to be quite frank. And so the church has abdicated responsibility in some ways of holding people accountable, and that serves nobody. That has done nothing but make the wounds deeper.
Wounds that have a lasting impact on both the victims and on the wider church community. A broken trust and criticisms of inaction are an ongoing challenge for religious leaders everywhere.
And the only way that we can rise above that challenge is to prove ourselves that we do have policies, procedures to maintain a safe environment for children and vulnerable adults. There's no other way of doing it, because we can talk all we want, and that's not going to do anything.
Religious leaders in Erie have now engaged in publicly visible efforts to safeguard the vulnerable in their communities.
We've published as a diocese a webpage of those who are credibly accused. Some of them are still alive, so it's a way in which we try to warn the public to stay away from these bad actors. We put lay people's names there too. People who taught in schools, who may have been coaches, whatever they did. If their name is there, there's been an allegation, a credible allegation brought against them.
I think the challenge is that there are people that as clergymen, we are held to a higher standard, and rightfully so. We are to be sentinels of love and protection and compassion for our children and our families. There's a trust factor there, a factor of integrity that must be upheld there. And when that is violated, then that can be devastating for individuals, devastating for children, devastating for families, and of course, devastating for the church as a whole. But let's not be naive. It's not just a Catholic thing. It's not just an Episcopal thing. It's everywhere. It is everywhere.
While church communities are often recognized by the buildings they occupy for their beauty, their strength, their awesome presence, any church is ultimately human, and humans have weakness. Humans can be ugly, and humans can be absent when needed the most.
But, we have to be responsible. We have to look at our past, and you have to own it and say, yeah, we really screwed up. As an individual church, as a denomination, as the church in general, the church Catholic, the church large. Doesn't mean the hurt isn't still there and the wound isn't still there. It's still there.
We needed to bring it into the light. Now, I know that's turned some people off.
I think the best thing that we did was to let this whole clergy scandal become public. They took the faith away from a lot of people. There are a lot of people who simply no longer believe today because they put all their trust in those men. And again, that's the flaw in the structure, that they set us up sort of as gods, and we have to break all of that down, look at the whole structure, everything, and start over again. Let's get this thing out in the open. Let's deal with it so that we can move on beyond it, because there's a special place in hell waiting for what those men did.
We need to ask for forgiveness, be humble enough to ask for it, and then we need to make the right steps in order to make sure those things don't happen again.
It's a human institution. It's founded by people and who are not perfect and who have made mistakes. And we're now beginning to reckon with the matters in the past where we've been on the wrong side, particularly the issues of white supremacy or sexual misconduct, in ways that we've not always acted in ways that are in line with our values and faith. And where we continue to be fallible but work toward a better future and work to do better.
Chronicles was made possible thanks to a community assets grant provided by the Erie County Gaming Revenue Authority, Spring Hill Senior Living, support by the Department of Education, and the generous support of Thomas B. Hagen.
This is WQLN.